Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Dirt Diaries. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a new episode or new archaeological discovery. If you're listening to this as a podcast, don't forget to like and rate. It really helps me out over there. And if you're with us here on YouTube, don't forget to like and comment as well. Helps me out here. And if you're new here, welcome. I hope you love ancient history, archaeology, mythology, mystery, and so much more, because my name is Dr. Tenninger Kallenberger and I bring the ancient world to you. Because no, this is not ancient aliens. This is the real thing, and of course, these are the Dirt Diaries. And last time on Dirt Diaries, well, we tried to get to the bottom of a rumor mill that has been going on for quite some time to see if we could pinpoint the statement where Cleopatra actually says, "No man will find my tomb." Ancient sources mention no verbiage, and even our buddy Shakespeare, for as much as he was writing back in his time and day, did not mention this. The Victorians were mum on this, and so were early archaeologists. So where did this come from? Who could say? But I for sure gave a few options about that, so be sure to weigh in on the previous episode, because I'm hoping that one day we can narrow down exactly where this came from. And I hope you all were very careful on the Ides of March this year, because for this week, we're moving away from the late Republican period in Rome and the last pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra, to a topic I've done in the past, way back in season 1. But we're back with a twist, a Dirt Diaries twist, if you will, because we're talking about who's who in the royal cemetery of Ur. Not just those with death pits, but those we consider to be royal graves in this tomb tour today. Now, before we dive into this episode, I can now share something really, really cool with you all, because I've talked about it online, or I've posted about it online already, but because of my filming schedule and when this new fun thing came out and was publicly announced, it was actually in between my filming schedule. So now I can share it with all of you here. But I'm so honored to state that I am working alongside of National Geographic as part of their creator cohort to represent history and archaeology. It has been an absolute wild time. I am completely in awe of who I get to stand next to, because the rest of the cohort are truly incredible people, from photographers, travelers, scientists, geologists, and conservationists. I truly am among some of the greatest minds out there. People who truly care about what they do and are really just so inspiring. So from me to you here at Dirt Diaries, thank you, because I don't know if this would have been possible if not for all of you and your support. Whether you're listening to the podcast, whether you're listening to it on YouTube, whether you've been watching me on social media for years, I don't think that this would have been possible without you guys. So just thank you for being you and for all of your support and for being here in my weird little corner of the internet as I talk all things archaeology, ancient history, and so much more. And with this, I want to reiterate a promise from me to you, from me at Dirt Diaries to you all incredible, wonderful people out there, that I will continue to give you the past, one story, one discovery, one artifact at a time, so that we can see that people have always been people, whether it's in the form of ancient toys that kids once played with, the world's oldest complaint about the quality of copper, the world's oldest peace treaty, family portraits, depictions of gods of old and sacred sites. Why? Because stories matter. Their stories, the stories of humanity. Now, before I go ahead and blubber away, because I absolutely can, let's head back to Ur to speak the names of those buried almost 5,000 years ago. And yes, I will be doing my makeup as I get ready with all of you today, just to keep my hands busy, as we talk ruins, artifacts, and more to make your day suck less, with stories of rulers from the early dynasty at Ur. So we begin today by going back almost 5,000 years to the land between two rivers, the Fertile Crescent itself, which, yes, was one of the gateway drugs for archaeology for me, because honestly, how could it not be? Mesopotamia is up there with probably one of the coolest places. I mean, the land between two rivers, silt. When you are 12 years old in 6th grade learning about this for the first time, it's hard not to just be utterly flabbergasted and wanting to learn so much more. So yeah, safe to say back in 2006, I was utterly hooked from this, which, oh my God, 2006 was 20 years ago. That's kind of insane. That 20 years outside of 6th grade, I would be sitting here with you all. And yeah, if I could tell my 6th grade self that, that's kind of crazy. As I've said previously, we're really anytime that I talk about the Royal Cemetery at whether it's about a specific grave like that of Puabi, or really just the death pits in general, I don't know how I was able to learn about the Royal Cemetery of and the potential human sacrifice that occurred here back in 6th grade, because that's not very 6th grade worthy, but man, at 12 years old, I was eating up all of those facts, which, I can't be mad about today because it got me hooked into the realm of archaeology, ancient history, and so much more. And yes, for those wondering, I was always saving up my allowance for the Scholastic Book Fair every single year to save up for the big, really cool mythology books, Egyptology books, sometimes a Titanic book here and there. But yeah, anything I could get my hands on for ancient history, I was saving up my allowance to get it. But as always, to help put all of these finds into perspective for all of you, because timelines are so helpful here at the Dirt Diaries. Let's take it back a few steps before we dive into the who's who of all of these tombs on our royal tomb tour today, and start back in 1922 to talk a little bit about this entire excavation operation. So back in 1922, this expedition to was a joint expedition between the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania's museum, so UPenn's museum. Now, during its first excavation season over 100 years ago, Woolley actually dug the area that had been revealed a few years or seasons prior to him doing this whole expedition. He was re-evaluating this one section that had already been excavated. And this was around the southern portion of the Great Temple, specifically around the platform there. And while he was looking in this area to kind of evaluate the entire site, he began, I guess, a test trench, you could say, which during such test trench, it didn't turn up any architecture that was considered new that he didn't already know about, but it did reveal some graves at different depths. And within these graves, he found extraordinary objects like lapis lazuli beads, carnelian beads, metal tools, gold, and so much more. Now, because of all of the gold that was uncovered in this trench, this became known as the Gold Trench because, yes, archaeologists, once again, top at naming things. So this Gold Trench would not be dug for a few more seasons. And before we go on, I'm sure some curious little kitty cat, little Dirt Diaries listener, little dirtling, little post-it note. I'm still trying to find a cool name for you guys. Anywho, somebody out there probably has a question along the lines of 10. What is a test trench? And I'm so happy you asked. So, a great question. So, what is a test trench and how would it be used? If archaeologists and researchers are wondering about the potential of the site that they are going to be excavating, but aren't exactly sure where they should start opening up tons of trenches, and they don't really know where to invest a lot of their resources in, they may, archaeologists, researchers, and more, they may actually choose to open up a few test trenches. And these are really trial trenches. They're not going to be opening up massive trenches where archaeologists normally dig in. I've normally dug in squares that are 5 meters by 5 meters. Test trenches can be a 1x1, a 2x2, a 2x1. It's just allowing archaeologists to open up a little crack in the ground, see what's going on, and then say, hey, we should revisit this area. This is a good area that we should, pour some of our resources and time, energy, effort, and money into it. Or, hey, nothing's really coming up in this area. Let's look elsewhere. Ultimately, it's just a great tool to help you kind of figure out where you should invest your resources in and really figure out where you should start digging first if you are kind of going into this new area. This was not technically new because somebody had already kind of excavated around the Gold Trench prior, around the temple base. So it was a good time to do some trial trenches. Alrighty, so as I said earlier, the trial trench, while open and dug in 1922, would kind of be placed on the back burner until 1926 when Woolley would come back to it. He's a very busy man. But once he had the time to come back over here, well, he became a busier bee because as soon as he started excavating the entire area, over 1,500 graves started just popping up out of the ground like daisies. So yeah, he was a little backed up. So while he was excavating the over 1,500 graves in this cemetery, our buddy Sir Leonard Woolley was trying to figure out what was the time period of all of this occurring at. And within the cemetery, there was a wall that cut its way through, and the wall dated to the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, which, get your king lists out, everybody. It's roughly the end of the 7th century BCE. He reigned from 604 to 562 BCE, and Nebuchadnezzar II actually belongs to the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which his father actually began. So, because of said wall cutting its way on through, well, Woolley supposed that the entire cemetery here dated to around Nebuchadnezzar II's rule, which is a fair guess to make, especially because how the wall cuts through, you could suppose that the wall and the graves date to the same time period. But the wall that was built during Nebuchadnezzar's reign is 2,000 years after this cemetery was active, actually, yes. And how do we know that? Well, we'll go into some dating in a hot second, but when a wall cuts through a cemetery and we're looking at stratigraphy, and we're looking at beautiful layers that tell us how old things are relative to the next layer, if a wall cuts through that, it's going to disturb all of the layers and tell us that this wall came from a upper layer and superimposed itself into the lower ones. It cut through it. So it's not at the same time period. It's actually earlier, but it's coming through it. Does that make sense? So after realizing, hey, this wall is later, well, Woolley and his team started to try to get to the bottom of this mystery of what is this date. And ultimately, they got to the date range of 2600 through 2500 BCE. And again, this was achieved through relative dating for archaeological excavations. And while we're digging, relative dating tells us more about the order of events of this event came first, followed by event 2, followed by event 3, event 4, so on and so forth. We are able to see what came in order, but we cannot tell you by looking at their stratigraphy the specific dates. We can tell you the date of something that is relative to something else at the site. And that, my dear friends, is how they were actually able to determine that the wall was, in fact, much, much later than the cemetery. It was because of the relative dating and the stratigraphy. Comparatively, in order to get those specific dates, we will look more at absolute dating. So relative dating can be stratigraphy, stylistic dating, all of that kind of stuff based on pottery and styles, or absolute dating can encompass aspects like dendrochronology and even carbon-14. But then we got relative chronology in terms of who was ruling and when, perhaps, because of the wonderful dates that were included in the seal impression strata from the site of Ur. And some of the tablets also came handy-dandily dated. Now, the seal impression strata was pretty thick. It was pretty deep, actually. And in the upper portion of the seal impression strata, so it came a little bit later, Woolley and his team actually got inscriptions concerning the first dynasty of Ur. And in the lower portion of the seal impression strata, Woolley and his team got seals, impressions, and more that were more of an archaic type. They were older than that on the top. So from textual evidence, iconographical and stylistic evidence, and carbon-14, the royal tombs date roughly to the very, very late 27th century BCE to the 26th century BCE, which we know as early dynastic 3 period, or also it is known as the Ur 3 period, which, if you remember my handy dandy little song, I think I did it last season, 2 seasons ago. Anywho, this little jingle I was taught back in undergrad by one of my professors, Dr. Knaut, it is part of the early history of Mesopotamia. In the little jingle, it goes, Sumer, Akkad, Gut, Ur 3, Isin, Larsa, Oas, Ob, Old Assyria, Old Babylon. That's the first part. What is the second part? I forget the rest. Shit. And during the Ur-3 dynasty and really early dynastic 3 period, we get writings that are actually shedding light on the lives of ordinary people and of course royalty as well. But we're finally getting writings and inscriptions about individuals of the past, almost 5,000 years ago. And sometimes when we're lucky enough, we get names, which I just love this because we are now getting stories of peoples of the past. We're getting the individual stories and individual histories of humanity. Alrighty, so let's talk graves, because ultimately, Woolley would uncover around 1,800 graves. And out of 1,800, well, only around 16 were considered to be royal, meaning not even 1% of them are royal graves. I did the math and it's 0.8%, not even a whole percentage. 99.2% of the graves at the Royal Cemetery of Ur are private graves and they are not considered to be royal. These 99.2% actually just really consist of pit graves that have the inhumations of single individuals, either in a coffin or in some cases, the individuals are wrapped in reed matting. And the other 1,784 graves, we are still getting personal objects that were buried alongside of the deceased, so that it could accompany them into the life after this one. But for the special 16, these were not your average normal pit graves that we have seen almost everywhere else. Nay, these are so much more. Some, in fact, were stone tombs with multiple chambers, multiple rooms even. And these tombs, these royal tombs, I should say, didn't just house the one body of the deceased royal member or elite individual of society, but these tombs also included many individuals who were servants, who were guards, musicians, and more, who accompanied their master and mistress into the next life. And while they were accompanying their master or mistress, they also brought their finest goods in as well, like harps, their own beautiful headdresses made of gold, beautiful seals and necklaces made of lapis lazuli, and many of them were also found with shimmering pieces of mother of pearl. Truly, many of these individuals found in these royal tombs were decked out to the nines. So in 1927, after Woolley was done excavating them, he really wanted to set out some qualifications, if you will, for when we should be calling certain graves royal and when, if they don't meet the qualifications, they should really just be referred to as private graves. So these graves that we're talking about today were deemed as royal based on the following qualifications. 1, they had to have had a distinct architectural structure that was composed of a tomb chamber that could be made out of stone or mud brick. It didn't really matter on the material, but the architecture mattered. And this chamber would be set at the base of a deep pit that could be approached by a ramp or a walkway. This is the dromos. Now, within this entire burial structure, this tomb, there would be the burial of servants with their master and mistress. And this aspect would come with many discussions following suit concerning human sacrifice. There's been a lot of dramatization about it within the realm of archaeology and ancient history following its excavation. It's really been a hot topic of, did these individuals go willingly? Were they poisoned? Were they killed? All of that kind of stuff. And I talked a little bit about it briefly in the episode from season 1 about the Great Death Pits. And did I talk about it? I may have mentioned it in the Puabi podcast from last season. But yeah, super, super interesting. And we can dive deeper into that one day because I think so many people are just fascinated by human sacrifice. Moving forward with the qualifications, these burials are also going to have more exquisite, more opulent grave goods as compared to those found in private graves. And a fourth one, which comes with, I would say, an asterisk, because while Woolley found the piece of evidence I'm going to mention in some burials that are considered royal, they were not found across the board. But he is saying if this fourth one is part of it, it should automatically kind of make it one. So the fourth qualification that kind of comes with an asterisk is that these graves have the remains of a wheeled vehicle. So it could be a cart, it could be a chariot, anything like that. So while Woolley didn't consider the wheeled vehicles to be a core determinant of royal graves at the time, others did. But now, of course, for the age-old question, who exactly is in these tombs? Well, the answer is a lot more complex than we originally thought, because the occupants who were buried in the royal graves are believed to have been buried over the span of a century, if not less. The pottery and the objects inside many of these royal graves have actually lent their hands, so to speak, and have really aided archaeologists, researchers, and scholars at pinpointing down a chronology that we can place the order of the tombs in. And from the artifacts, king lists, and more, we get a beautiful guesstimation of who we think each tomb was intended for. And this, my dear friends, is what we are diving into today, because the list of who's who and their chronology has been proposed by Dr. Reed. So for our tomb tour today, we begin with the earliest and also the largest grave in the entire cemetery, that of 1236. So the grave of 1236 contained 4 rooms, architecturally speaking, and contained several bodies. Now, this grave has actually been associated with the ruler Imdagud, who was believed to be an early ruler, if not an early king of around 2600 BCE. Now, scholars didn't just pull this name out of thin air. They weren't looking at Howard Carter and all of the Egyptologists of the time who were uncovering the names of pharaohs like Tutankhamun or anything like that. No, they actually found this name on a seal. Plot twist within the tomb. But while Imdagud is named on a seal in the tomb, which we love, in archaeology, makes our job a lot easier, there comes a sigh from the crowd, because Imdagud is not in the Sumerian king list, which I don't mean to laugh, but we could talk about the Sumerian king list one day. You guys let me know if you want that. And moving forward, the seal that does name our early king of our early leader of is very reminiscent iconographically of a later seal that does name another king of that of Mesopotamia. So when Woolley excavated this tomb, he discovered that the burial chamber had actually been robbed in antiquity, and it had been robbed through 2 places, through the roof and then through the chamber. And within the chamber, where the deceased royal member of society usually would have been held, well, there were only a few bone fragments that remained after the looters came through. But Woolley also found ostrich shell remains, which do come from elite objects. He found beads of lapis lazuli, beads of gold, golden wreaths, a gold and lapis scepter, and more. So while it was robbed, they didn't take everything. So based on this, well, our buddy Woolley, he thought, hey, this grave must belong to a member of royalty, if not a king. And this was based on the grave goods and the seal. Now, this is where things get a little hunky-dory, because Imdagud is not on the Sumerian king list. But Reed, who constructed this chronology of tombs and which tomb came first and who was meant to be in them, he believes that Imdagud was actually a king of and that we can find comparative evidence to support this on other seals from Mari, which is in Syria. But other scholars and archaeologists actually believe that while these seals from Mari do support that, they do not believe that Imdagud held the title of Lugal, which is the title of king. He was no doubt high-ranking in their book, but they don't think that he held the title of king. He may have held the title of, say, governor or leader or something along those lines, but he may not have been the king. And going a step further, he may have not been the intended occupant for this tomb. But while some people are saying, hey, Imdagud may not have been the main occupant of this tomb or who this tomb was intended for, no other names of high-ranking leaders, individuals have been proposed. So again, coming with problems, not solutions. But it's really interesting to go back to the title of Lugal because we're going to see this in the feminine form of Nin come up a little bit later on with some queens who are buried in the royal cemetery. But the aspect of Lugal meaning king and perhaps Imdagud being governor or an early emerging ruler at Ur kind of makes sense if we think about it with Egypt. Because while Narmer is really associated with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt and beginning the pharaonic office, Narmer might be the first pharaoh of unified Egypt, but there were early rulers prior to him, like Menes, like Scorpion II. We have so many other kings from different parts and places of ancient Egypt, from Memphis, from Thebes. Different rulers are emerging because one is going to be from Upper Egypt, one is going to be from Lower Egypt. So it could kind of be that of these are rulers of regions, not kings, if that makes sense. So I agree, Imdagud may not have been a king of Ur, but he may have been an early emerging leader in Ur. And then we could, of course, just go into a huge nitpicking discussion about what titles actually mean. Does king in this sense mean that you have conquered? Does king in this sense mean that you are just ruling or just a leader? I don't know. I could talk about this all day, but that's where my thought is going. So I see both points here of, sure, he may not be on the Sumerian king list, but if he is an early emerging leader, governor, may not have had the title of Lugal, he and his line subsequently would come to rule Ur. So I agree for both parties, if that makes sense. But yeah, I could jibber jabber about titles and names and what they mean and like have a whole discussion on when should the word king be used and when should governor or regional leader be used. Because how people are constructing power through words, through images during this time is so fascinating to me. All right, so some of you might be asking, hey, why is this tomb considered to be royal if we're not seeing a death pit or the remains of other attendants inside? And that's a great question because Woolley was making this proposal. So some of the bone fragments in the tomb may be what remains of the attendants that were buried there. And because the tomb had been looted prior, we don't know the official number of attendants or main occupants that were in here because everything was disturbed. The bodies may have just not survived that long, which we do see in other graves. So it could just be for a plethora of reasons, which Woolley does speculate about. Alrighty, moving from 1236, we go to grave 779. And this is actually a monumental grave believed to belong to the son and the successor of Imdagud, that of Ur-Pablasag. This tomb has a massive chamber and 4 rooms on the inside. There is no clear death pit in this tomb, comparatively that we see with other tombs, but it's been speculated by Woolley and his team that the different rooms within the entire chamber may have acted as the death pit, which does make sense. So the 2 central chambers actually had a collapsed roof and they were looted in antiquity, meaning ultimately we don't know how many attendants, guards, musicians, and more were actually originally part of this tomb. But what we do know from what remains is that there were 5 guards and 6 other bodies that were found. And a fun fact about grave 779 is in the back corner of one of these chambers, next to a crushed skull of a man whose head was covered with beads of lapis lazuli, was where the famed Standard of Ur was actually uncovered. And we could do a whole entire breakdown of the Standard of Ur or all of the top 10 artifacts to come out of the Royal Cemetery of Ur. Maybe we'll do that this season because the Standard of Ur is so incredible, with one side being war, one side being peace. Just, it's so gorgeous, and it's usually shown off as a great representation of Mesopotamian art and Sumerian art in all Art History 101 classes. But for those wondering, if you do want to see it, you can actually see it in the British Museum today. Now again, my dear friends, we run into another problem because Ur-Pablasag, much like his papa, is not in the Sumerian king list. But we do know that he was king of Ur because of the titles and inscriptions that we do find at Ur. So yeah, we could do a whole breakdown of the Sumerian king list and the problems of it, who's on it, which notable kings make part of it up, because, and I don't know if this is shocking or not, but who is on the Sumerian king list and who is not, and the length of their reigns, has brought people in academia to almost throw hands. The Sumerian king list, for how great it is for our field and everything, has almost brought the field to throw blows, to throw elbows, haymakers, anything. Like, some of the greatest discoveries in the realm and field of archaeology will actually cause so much disruption in the field for scholars and archaeologists studying it that it's insane, and truly. So we could go over the Sumerian king list and the fact that academics are ready to throw haymakers because of it, which I always think is hysterical when academics get so, I don't want to say professionally petty with one another, but the academic tea is piping. You guys, it is secretly piping. Alrighty, so moving from 779 in the tomb of Ur-Pablasag, we go to tomb 777, which is believed to house the remains of the wife of Ur-Pablasag, and we unfortunately do not know her name. And chronologically speaking, 777 is contemporary, so at the same time, as grave 779. Now, this grave had a collapsed dome that was also robbed in antiquity, but we were actually really lucky that some artifacts remained within the tomb itself, because not only was it robbed, but this tomb was really found by sheer luck, because originally this tomb was part of a trial trench. And during the trial trench excavations, the portion of the collapsed roof was discovered first. Now, in this tomb, next to the chamber itself, we have 3 individuals with a 4th near the dromos, so near the ramp or the hallway. All had spears, so reports do denote that these may be the remains of guards. And the 2 chambers on the inside of the tomb did have human remains within them. One chamber had the remains of 4 attendants, and in the other chamber was a single skeleton belonging to a woman. Now, it's the single skeleton on her own that many believe to be the tomb's main occupant, the wife of Ur-Pablasag. Alrighty, so next up on the tomb tour is going to be tomb 755, and I don't mean to sigh, but this one comes with an asterisk because there's a lot to it. There's a lot to break down about it. So let's go ahead and dive in. So this tomb comes with an asterisk because there is no death pit in here, but because of the grave goods and the names that are on the grave goods and all the other boxes getting ticked except for the death pit, Woolley wants to name 755 as a royal tomb. But, and it's a huge, big but, this tomb doesn't have a death pit or any human sacrifices, which according to the proposed qualifications that he himself came up with, 755 should not be considered a royal tomb. But for today, I am bringing it up with an asterisk because Woolley brings it up as a royal grave, and many today will also state that 755 is a royal grave, but many also state that it should be considered a private grave. But because Woolley's not stepping down without a fight, he is making some proposals to 755. So he's stating for everybody else who wants to say that 755 is not a royal grave, that we do in effect have something that was discovered in that tomb that could be a stand-in for human sacrifices. So let me go ahead and dive into what that means, because it seems a little crazy at first. So because there were no remains that suggest that there was human sacrifice or attendants buried inside this grave, there was a pile of female adornment and female jewelry that was placed in a pristine pile in the grave, grouped beautifully, grouped separately from everything else, because, as Woolley states, and I pretty much believe in as well, that was an active decision. Jewelry just doesn't end up in a beautiful, neat pile. So Woolley's thinking here to suppose that this could be a stand-in for human sacrifice was that this was a ritual sacrifice of objects and not people, which we do see elsewhere throughout Mesopotamia, Europe, and more, that there could be a ritual sacrifice of objects, high-ranking, elite objects, as a stand-in for human sacrifice. So that makes sense to me. But because of the qualifications that Woolley proposed, not everybody was convinced that it was a stand-in for human sacrifice. But Reed and Urroyal later on do agree that this tomb should be considered royal. Alrighty, so now that we got that little kerfuffle out of the way, who is buried here? Well, before that, we gotta talk about what was found, because that will help us out. Well, first off, a fun fact about this tomb is that this tomb was originally discovered because of a bronze spearhead that was just poking up outside of the ground, begging to be explored. So outside of the bronze spearhead, in the grave was the remains of a wooden coffin with a male skeleton. And the other objects in this grave only have parallels found in other royal graves. Nowhere in any other private burial do we see any other objects rival these. For example, we have gold daggers here. We also have gold bowls, both of which that have the name of Meskalumdug inscribed on them. And there's also a copper vessel, I believe it's a copper bowl, that has the name of Nimbanda on it. Now, Meskalumdug is a king of Ur, and Nimbanda is actually believed to be his first wife and queen. So the fact that we're having high-ranking elite objects that are not seen anywhere outside of the royal graves with the names of a king and one of his queens on it. Many actually previously believed that this was the grave of Meskalumdug, but because of the lack of human sacrifice, the lack of wheeled vehicles, many have actually speculated that this grave now belongs to the son of Meskalumdug, a prince of his, Prince Meskalumdug, because we don't know his name. Some hypotheses within the field are that this Prince Meskalumdug, he died before his parents, and that's why there are objects that name both of his parents in this grave. And we can kind of think of it as Meskalumdug and his queen, Nimbanda, that while they lost a son, they were able to choose which objects they wanted interred with him as a way of marking that he was theirs. Which, when you think about how memory is constructed and how family ties are also constructed, this makes a lot of sense. And a beautiful way to honor perhaps their son who predeceased them. And now to the possible grave of 755's mother, we move to that of 1054. Now the grave of 1054 was believed to be for Nimbanda, the first wife of Meskalumdug, and all in all, this is a massively complex grave. Not only because of the architecture, but because of the objects found in it that really throws another wrench into what we know about Ur. So starting off, this grave was actually discovered completely by accident because the excavators were trying to get a large artifact outside of grave 1053, and they stumbled on grave 1054. And in this grave, we have a main chamber, which holds the remains of 4 men and 1 woman. Now, this woman definitely was somebody of status and importance because of her central location. She also was found with a gold cylinder seal on her, carnelian beads, a dagger, and more. And next to her was the remains of a wooden box, and inside the remains of a wooden box was another seal. This one was made out of lapis lazuli, and the cylinder seal came with a name on it, that of Meskalumdug. Now, in this woman's hands, it was found she was buried with a gold fluted tumbler, and then in the shaft of this grave, going down into it, this is where more problems arise, because in the shaft, 4 more bodies were discovered in burials that come from much later times. And in one of these burials, we get another seal. And this is where the loop comes from, because on this seal, there's an inscription that says Ninbanda, wife of Mesopotamia. I mean, it's great. We're getting a lot of names here. We're getting a lot of great evidence of inscriptions. Unfortunately, Mesopotamia rules after Meskalumdug. We are now part of the case of two Ninbandas. So, this is where things get a little tricky, because perhaps there were two queens in Sumerian history, in the history of Ur, who had the name Ninbanda. It could have been a, I guess, more popular name of the time. And when I read this hypothesis in research and articles, my brain instantly took me to the scene from Hercules where Hades is strangling Pain and Panic because they never killed Hercules. And they state, well, maybe it's just a really popular name nowadays because back in the day, don't you remember how everybody was named Brittany and all the boys were named Jason? So we could have a case of two Ninbandas because this was a popular name, perhaps for, elite women to take. Or, and this other one is a hypothesis in the field, is that the name, when you break it down, you get Nin and Banda. The first part of Nin is a title meaning queen. So perhaps this Ninbanda, the one who's the mother of 755, the one who was buried in 1054, perhaps this Ninbanda, it wasn't her name. Perhaps it was just a title that she took, that she was the queen of Meskalumdug, that she was queen consort. It could have been used as a title that way, or even meaning junior queen if she was one of multiple wives of Meskalumdug. Either way, her tomb and the objects found within it do support and suggest that she was one of royalty. So whether or not that was her name or the title that she was known by, we right now are just not too sure. Alrighty, next up we move to grave 1130, which was actually right next to 1054. And in this grave we have a wooden coffin with the remains of one woman inside. And her skull was broken, but still had a beautiful headdress on it. She had tons of gold, lapis lazuli, carnelian, gold chains, beads, necklaces, a silver belt, and so many other just elite objects. Now, she was found to have been buried with a limestone bowl in her hands. And outside her coffin were other really cool finds, like more copper tools, the remains of a harp, and a silver bowl that stylistically looks more Syrian than Mesopotamian and looks like an import rather than locally made. Now, the elite objects and imported goods found in this tomb do suggest to archaeologists and scholars that there is an association between 1130 and 755, who they state the occupant of 755 must have had a spouse. So the tomb of Prince Meskalumdug, his widow, is likely buried, as they believe, in 1130. Now, in his notes and publications, Woolley has actually listed grave 1130 as being a private grave. But sources today have moved it from being private to a royal grave. But in my research, I couldn't really figure out why, because it doesn't fit Woolley's qualifications. Outside of the elite objects, we're still missing the human sacrifice, and there's really no chamber. There's a coffin, but there's no different architectural features like a dromos. There's no pit. There's no chamber. It's just a coffin. So was a little confused on that. Alrighty, next up we are moving to what is known today as the King's Grave. That's right, we are looking at grave 789. And you might be wondering, why is this known as the King's Grave? Well, it's because of the death pit that is located in it. Now, the main chamber of this tomb was looted when it was excavated, but the death pit had the remains of 60 individuals. 6 of them were actually at the front of the dromos, so the front of the hallway, the front of the ramp. And these are believed to have been guards because of the spears and the helmets that they had. Now, when we kind of zoom out of this grave as a whole, it's been speculated that grave 789 actually was part of a larger grave complex because it is right next to and shares part of it with tomb 800. So it's believed that this entire complex of 789 and 800 was actually constructed around the same time, but the occupant in tomb 789 died before the main occupant in tomb 800, Puabi, and because of that, tomb 789 was closed before that of tomb 800, which does make sense. Now, in the death pit, in the many remains in the death pit, there's actually this copper relief that the imagery on it has been noted as being distinctly Egyptian, with parallels being found around Dynasty 5 in Egypt. And you might be wondering, well, how the heck did it get into a death pit in Ur? Well, it's believed that this Egyptian copper relief may have made its way from Egypt around Dynasty 5, Old Kingdom Egypt, let's put it that way, made its way up to the Syrian area, potentially Mari. And then because Ur was constantly going at it with Mari, but that it was taken as loot, and that is how it ended up in Ur. Now, in this tomb, we do get the remains of 2 wheeled vehicles. Yes, 2 chariots, or the remains of 2 chariots were found. Each had 3 oxen, and the remains of the drivers of each were also uncovered. There were also lyres uncovered in the death pit, so musicians. And in the tomb chamber, because it was looted, no body was discovered and no seal was discovered with a name on it because that would make archaeology too easy. So, who is here? Well, if we go back a hop, skip, and a jump, in 1054, we did get a seal naming Mesopotamian by both name and that he was king of Ur. And if we go back even farther, there was a bead, and I believe it's a lapis lazuli bead, from Mari that names Mesopotamian as the father of Mesopotamia. And because all the other boxes are being ticked for this grave to be considered royal, many speculate that this grave originally held the body of Mesopotamian, and that his second wife, who he predeceased, was buried right next to him in tomb 800. So now let's talk tomb 800. And if you want more of a deep dive on Puabi, the main occupant of tomb 800, I have a whole episode on that, deep diving into the topic. It actually was the first episode of season 2, so you can go ahead and check that out now. But let's talk Puabi. So her tomb ticks all of the boxes beautifully for a royal grave. And in the chamber where her body was actually placed on a bier, and surrounding this bier were the remains of 3 personal attendants. She was about 40 years old when she died, and she stood at just under 5 feet tall. She was completely adorned with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. From human remain analysis, the skull of Puabi was actually too incomplete to provide us any sort of reconstruction. And because of it, we actually don't know how she died. Now, outside of her chamber, we have many, many more bodies. On the ramp near the entrance of her tomb, archaeologists excavating here found the remains of 5 individuals, all of which who were men who carried copper alloy daggers. So these 5 men were still guarding her tomb thousands of years later. At the edge of the ramp were the remains of a wheeled vehicle with the remains of 2 oxen and 4 men, and a 5th body of a man was recovered near the corner, and other bodies were found in the northeastern part of the grave. But at the southern point of the grave were the remains of 10 female attendants. And all of these attendants were wearing elaborate headdresses. These women were lined up into 2 rows, and some finds that have been associated with them are harps and lyres. And Puabi was actually found with a seal on herself, which makes archaeology so much easier because on the seal that was right on her we get an inscription that names her. The seal is divided into two parts. Its entirety is a banquet scene made up of an upper and a lower register that is carved into lapis lazuli. And the inscription on the left portion of the seal reads Nin Puabi, which originally was mistranslated into Nin Shubad, and she was buried with an incredible amount of jewelry. Precious stones, gold, a beautiful gold floral headdress, and so much more. And as Woolley described it, quote, the whole of the upper part of the queen's body was covered with beads of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, carnelian, and agate. They were astonishingly numerous and of exceptionally fine quality, end quote. Now, the name Puabi is not attested in any historic lists, but the fact that she holds the title Nin Queen is pretty impressive. So the fact that she is named alone on her seal is also really fascinating because she is not known as Nin Puabi, wife of so-and-so. She's not known as Puabi, daughter of so-and-so. Her seal just lists her as Nin Puabi. So because we see no evidence of a man ruling with her, there has been speculation to suggest that she may have ruled on her own, perhaps after her husband predeceased her. Next up on the tomb tour is that of tomb 1050. This is the tomb of Ashus Kalingir, and this tomb was fully constructed out of mud brick. And we are super lucky because within this tomb, we actually got a seal naming the main occupant, that of Ashus Kalingir, wife of Akalamdug, king of Love a good tomb with a seal with names. So yes, if you've done your math, this is the second, count 'em, two, the second tomb to have a seal that names the tomb's occupant. 2 out of 16. I should do the math for that, what that percentage is. 2 out of 1,800 that we know who is actually buried there. And this individual, this queen, this wife, she was found in a wooden coffin. And there were 40 other bodies discovered in the tomb with her. So this is a death pit. But the attendants, so the individuals buried with her, were not richly dressed. Many just had earrings, some ribbons in their hair, and overall is considered to be a poor death pit. Now, next up is going to be tomb 1332, which is believed to be the tomb of Akalamdug, husband of the individual buried in 1050, likely due to the location of the two. And this one is interesting because no chamber was discovered during excavations, although Woolley noted that it was likely destroyed. And this tomb gets a bit weirder because while there's no main chamber and no body of the main occupant, there in this tomb are two death pits superimposed on one another. They are layered like such, and they are separated between one another by 1 meter. In each of these death pits are around 20 individuals, and I say around 20 because I believe it's the lower level where there are some reports that state that there are 23 as compared to the upper portion, which there are 20 individuals, but I think it depends on the report that you read. And in the lower layer of the death pit, there was a harp discovered with the remains of likely a musician, and the harp actually had a shell plaque on it. And the bodies of the attendants, so the 20 and the 23 that were discovered in each of these death pits, had the same kind of objects on them that we saw in 1050, leading many to suggest that these two were connected with one another. But since there is no main chamber and we have two death pits on top of each other, some researchers actually speculate that this was not in fact a tomb, but that these two death pits are part of a separate burial event. So while Akalamdug is named on a seal in tomb 1050, Akalamdug, like many who came before him, is not listed in the Sumerian king list. Now, next up is actually one of the graves that Woolley first excavated here, which is grave 337. And it was originally found as part of a test trench And unfortunately, 337 just wasn't mapped well. In this tomb was a destroyed chamber wall, which Woolley then associated as being part of a wall that led to a death pit. And we only have the remains of 3 individuals in this tomb. So from the 3, we get 2 full skeletons. One of the skeletons is in good condition. The other skeleton, not great condition, pretty poor actually. And then the 3rd skeleton is not so much a skeleton, but it is just the skull of a child. And in this grave, we see that there is a group of personal jewelry kind of put to the side in a nice, neat little group, little pile, very similar to what we saw with 755. And this tomb is believed to have been for the 2nd wife of Akhlumdug. Alrighty, next we move to kind of a joint tomb. It's listed as 2, but they are associated with one another and usually grouped together. So I'm doing the same here. And that is 1232 and 1237. And listing them together here because Woolley listed them together and thought that they went together. He actually believed that 1232 was the dromos of the larger death pit in 1237. And these 2 tombs, I guess, they are separated by a small mud brick wall. And in 1232, there's more animal sacrifice remains here. But there is no chamber in either 1232 or 1237. But 1237, my dear friends, is termed the Great Death Pit because it held the remains of 74 individuals. All of the individuals buried here are female. We had 4 harpists with them, and then we had 64 ladies in waiting who were lined up and buried in orderly rows. They had all had elaborate headdresses on them and splendid jewelry. Now, while they were all in orderly rows and they had beautiful headdresses, the only really difference between these women was that a group of them had gold hair ribbons and the other group had silver hair ribbons. Now, Woolley's ground plan of Royal Tomb 1237, known as the Great Death Pit at showed the 74 skeletons numbered as they were uncovered. Now, reconstructions of this tomb were aimed at trying to showcase the final moments of these individuals' lives. And many of them, while in black and white, had crazy, sensational captions along the lines of awaiting death in the king's tomb, victims of human sacrifice. An authentic reconstruction. Now, the excavators during their seasons notoriously interpreted the royal grave 1237 as the main scene of a ritual mass suicide. The story was widely published in famous illustrations that appeared in the Illustrated London News. And in these reconstructions, it was hammered home that these people willingly drank poison and were buried alive to follow their master and mistress into the afterlife. And these reconstructions were dramatized for such a long time in the 20th century. So much so that a story was going around for quite some time concerning one of the attendants in this grave, that she had no time to fix one of the silver hair ribbons because she was late to her own funeral in a sense. And that's why she had her silver hair ribbon in her hand, because she didn't have enough time to put it in her hair. And you may be saying, well, why would some crazy story like this come out after these excavations if that's just not the truth? Well, I'd like to remind everybody that around this time is when the mummy's curse was making a sweeping sensation across the world. So it makes sense that this is why this was coming out. That false stories were doing the gauntlet in the news cycle. From all of this, while we get many attendants who are dressed with beautiful headdresses, all female attendants, we have musicians, we have so much going on in this tomb. So who was this tomb intended for? Well, it's believed that this tomb was likely intended for that of Mesopotamia, who was a famed king of But getting out of the death pit and everything that happened in there, dramatizations and all, we move to grave 55, which is believed to belong to a queen of Amenhotep. It was believed to have been royal, but was found robbed. And objects here are really, really interesting because while much of the grave was robbed in antiquity, there was a whole pile of objects and goodies found, placed in the corner of the tomb as though they were getting ready to be snatched in the next run by the robbers, but the robbers never came back for it. So we have tons of carnelian beans, tons of cockle shells with makeup inside, silver bracelets, antelope skulls, and more. So much was uncovered here, even though it was looted. So because of all the cosmetics, because of all the cockle shells here, there are two speculations for who this tomb belongs to. Could have possibly belonged to another wife of Mesopotamian, or, as I said earlier, the wife and queen of Anapata. And which, speaking of Anapata, we move to grave 580, which was poorly preserved but very rich. It included weaponry, a vehicle with an ox, but no bodies whatsoever, which Woolley explained it was likely because they just didn't survive. It may have just come down to preservation. And this tomb was also found in a trial trench. And in here we have a seal with animal combat scenes, a dagger with an owner's mark on it right near the hilt, but no chamber. But a seal in this tomb actually does come with an inscription. It names Hekasig, priestess of Pabasag. We do see gold bands and filigree in this tomb, but stylistically, these look like they come much later, perhaps at the end of Dynasty 1 of Ur. And Anapata is actually also a son of Mesopotamian, so believed to be still within the royal family here. And last but certainly not least, we have tomb 1157, which is believed to belong to Meskiaguna. Inside here were 58 secondary skeletons, and no legible seals were recovered in this tomb, and it is considered to be a death pit, but of the poorer sort. Woolley's words, not mine. No chamber was discovered in this tomb, but like many who came before, Woolley speculated that it just was destroyed. But rejoice, my dear Dirt Diaries friends, because Meskiaguna is actually in the Sumerian king list and is believed to be another son of Mesopotamian. So for you all, I have constructed this beautiful family tree and associations of these tombs. And yeah, it was a lot to try and go through, but please enjoy all of it. But let's talk a little bit about the aftermath, because following the rule of Meskiaguna, the first dynasty of Ur goes into decline and ultimately ends with Ur's defeat, noted in the Sumerian king list, with the kingship being carried off to Awan, which was part of the Elamites during the early dynastic 3B period. And during this period as a whole, really after the first dynasty of Ur, during this period within Mesopotamia, we are seeing city-states go at it with one another. And about a century later, after the first dynasty of Ur, we get the Akkadian Empire beginning with that of Sargon of Akkad, known as Sargon the Great in history today, whose daughter is the world's first named author at Henduana. Now in Egypt, because I talked about how the royal graves at Ur do correspond roughly with Dynasty 5 of Egypt, that places us actually in the Old Kingdom of Egypt. And if we're looking to see what's going on with Greece at that time period, that places us in the early Minoan II period, which during this time, elsewhere outside of Ur, the entire Eastern Mediterranean world is hustling and bustling because we have so many interconnections going on with interregional maritime trade happening. And if more goods are on the market, well, more wealth can be amassed by more people, and therefore more powers can emerge. But yeah, all of this is a really fascinating time period because in Mesopotamia, we're just having city-states constantly kind of battle for power until Sargon the Great comes to power in the 24th century BCE. He's 23 something, but I'm just going to call it the 24th century BCE because I don't remember the specific date. But yeah, in the Aegean world, in Egypt, we are seeing a massive boom in the market. We're seeing a lot of interconnections going on, a lot of trade going on, and really just a great time period. That comes before decline, ultimately. Before the late Bronze Age collapse, we actually see collapse a little bit at the end of the early Bronze period, which there, in that last kind of little section, because I could jibber jabber about it all day long, I gave a little hint about something I'm working on, a project, if you will. So drop below what you think that project is, because I'm curious to see if anybody gets it, but I kind of laid some little hints about what it was in that little section. Hopefully it was enough for a hint, but we'll go from there another time, because once it comes out, I'll see who was right because it should be coming out shortly, which I'm super excited to tell everybody about. But because we were talking about Old Kingdom Egypt, what else was happening during Old Kingdom Egypt? Well, we get the Step Pyramid of Djoser during Dynasty 3, and we get the Great Pyramid of Khufu and the other pyramids at Giza to Khafre and to Menkaure during Dynasty 4. And if you want to come walk where the pharaohs did in all of the dynasties and kingdoms of Egypt, we are heading to Egypt this October. Perfect for spooky month. Trip is confirmed. So come along with an archaeologist and art historian as we travel the realm and path of the pharaohs. Super, super excited about it. And yeah, as always, stay curious, keep your books open, and I will see you guys next time on the Dirt Diaries.